I'm Mark, and I'm founder and CEO of a company called SpotHero, and I'm going to talk to you about having many competitors who've raised more money than you. And so I'll go back to when we had about 200 different competitors, and there were a lot of different difficulties that we experienced. SpotHero is a marketplace that connects drivers and parking spots. We play in the $30 billion parking market in the US. We're also in Canada. We're in a couple hundred cities. We work with 1,000 parking companies and 2 million parking spots. But it wasn't always like that. So I'm going to talk about some of the strategies that we experienced in terms of massive competition. The first was when we had a lot of pressure to expand to all these different cities. We're based in Chicago. We're only in one city. And a lot of our investors, a lot of my mentors, and the media was calling us a one-hit wonder. We were in one city, and our competitors were in 50 cities, 100, even 150. And so I was actually nervous because I didn't feel like we had enough money, resources, time, focus to be able to even execute on one city, let alone all of these others. And what's interesting is we stuck to one, not because we had some crazy strategy, but it was actually because of my fear that I couldn't go to more than one city. And so we did block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, and built up a great single market, which was Chicago. And it started to scale. And we built liquidity in a single place and learned the processes to be able to move to other places. And then the next city we went to was Parking Panda, which was in Washington, D.C. We went head-to-head with them. And then the next city we went to was New York. And we had a strategy which was conquer and hold, conquer and hold. And we went from a one-hit wonder to then a two-hit wonder to then a maybe a three-hit. New York was really kind of tough. And what's interesting is today we sell more digital parking in one city than our next competitor does in 150 cities combined. And we sell more digital parking than every other company combined. And so all the companies that, were in this massive land grab, and it was stressful because we were told if we don't get this city, somebody else will, and it's going to be too late. But the reality was, at least in our marketplace, we were able to build liquidity and process and go city by city until we became the category leader. Next strategy, know thy customer. One of the things we realized, there's maybe 5 or 6 different major segments in parking, is that the commuter was the highest purchase frequency. Now, I mentioned one of our competitors, Parking Panda at the time. They actually achieved liquidity in the event parking space. And it's actually easier to achieve liquidity pairing the supply and demand with an event, but it has the lowest purchase frequency, only 1.1 times a year. So even if you achieve liquidity, the question is, how do you scale that? And so for us, we achieved liquidity in the commuter space, which had the highest purchase frequency, but it was the hardest. And so while everybody was spreading their resources across all these different geographies, we were focused in one. I remember sitting down with the CEO of Parkwiz, another competitor at the time, and he said to me, how are you spending so much money in marketing? He's like, I've raised more money than you, and I hear your ads on the radio when I'm driving. I see posters around town. On the internet, you're everywhere. And I said, I'm spending less money than you. I'm just only in 3 markets. And so we were able to focus that, which helped build up each place, but we didn't just focus on a geography, we focused on the customer segment. And so take a look at Parking Panda over time. They ended up having the same number of customers as us, but we were 10 times larger. And that was because we focused on the highest frequency use case. And we ended up buying Parking Panda. And that was nice. Strategy number 3, unit economics. So the prevailing kind of notion is that no matter what, over time, CACs will always go up. And they can, and they usually do. But when you achieve network effects on a geography by geography basis, what we found is that our CACs actually went down or were stable. And so the supply density that we built up actually helped us get more customers. So as we spent more on marketing, we actually were acquiring more customers for less. And this was a key kind of insight which we found, and we were one of the only ones that found it because we had focused on one city. We built it to a place where we got the liquidity, we got the network effects, and we were able to tweak those and then go to another place. And this was key. As you can see, this is a graph by our different kind of cities in a high-level summary of the cost of customer acquisition and then the number of customers that we're acquiring and the supply density that drove that in each place. What came first? The chicken or the egg? It's hard, right? Well, for us, it was supply. And one of the key interesting things that happened with supply is that the large and medium-sized parking, companies that were in many cities, they saw all the revenue in one city. And again, we had a lot of pressure. It was hard because a lot of the companies are like, you're in one city. I'm in 300 cities. What are you going to do for me? But we rose to the highest levels of management in terms of importance because we were bringing so much revenue in just one place. And what that meant was, as they looked to extrapolate, even though we were smaller than some of our competitors in dollars, because we were so concentrated in one place, we told them we were going to scale to other cities. And so we got the attention of not just the local guys, but folks at the highest levels within the organizations. And so we had a strategy for a single market, and almost accidentally we realized this will help us scale to more because we became that much more important. Because while many companies were bringing very small amounts of revenue in one place, they saw how much we were bringing, or in many places, they saw how much we were bringing in one place and thought, well, what could happen if we bring it to more? And so we really was helpful on a unit basis because we were profitable on the transaction on a gross margin basis, which helped us immensely when we were raising capital later, although there were troubles with raising capital, which I'll get to as well. But the supply density really was helpful in a single market with the highest purchase frequency segment to then be able to light up cities in ways that nobody else could. Because when we went to a market, we could have more supply than people that had been there for 5 years before us. Take a look at our GMV, or gross merchandise value cohorts, on a supply basis. After a year, 275% more revenue than in the first month, and then 500% in 12 months after that. Nobody else in the market was able to achieve anything close to this, which meant that even though there were 200 competitors that had quote-unquote way more scale because of the number of geographies, the companies listened to us. And the reason is because we performed. And so it's not just about revenue, it's also about moat. Because as we scaled, we've seen a lot of different companies try to come into the space. And so most people know us for our mobile apps, our websites, SpotHero, Parking Panda, Android, iOS. Maybe you've used the Hertz app and booked parking with us, more on that later, or ParkMe or Parkopedia, or maybe Google Assistant, which we announced at CES. But what you don't realize is most of the work or the complexity is actually behind the scenes. One of the things that we really never talk about is a tow truck app. What is that? It's a simple app. These are the list of license plates that can park here now. And that's it. And it's used by thousands of different tow truck drivers. Well, why is this important? Because the industry, $30 billion, of which 30% is still cash only, if you could believe that. At the time, when we built it, all of our competitors had printout only. And that was, at the time, for us, we were nearly 100% web, again, if you could believe that, because today 90% of our sales are on the mobile phone. But the way that you interacted with the product is you printed out a piece of paper and gave it to a person, or you put it on your dashboard. And when we built the tow truck app, these tow truck drivers were checking the license plates, which meant that you can buy them on the mobile phone. So again, in hindsight, you're probably thinking, yeah, of course, that was beneficial, but this was a big leap forward to the industry. We focused on, you scale supply, you scale demand, but how do you create value from a moat perspective and differentiation? And we were able to be the only place to reserve parking on a mobile phone. And we brought tens of thousands of spaces in a single city, which then became hundreds of thousands. And all of our competitors, you had to print out a piece of paper, but not on SpotHero. We then also have started to build out dynamic pricing engine, integrations into accounting systems, the different machines and point of sale systems. And it's, you're probably thinking, well, if you raise $100 million, you could build a lot of stuff, but it has taken a while. We did ruthlessly prioritize. And the way that we did it was we scaled supply. We got supply, we got demand. We then made the experience better for our demand, and then we made our experience better for our supply. Business development is better than VC. Well, what do I mean by that? I'm going to go back to when we had raised $4 million. We had been around a couple years. And then there was this thing called on-demand valet. Who here has heard of on-demand valet? Okay, not many. It really hit the US hard. And what on-demand valet was, it was this idea that you could press a button, your car would be whisked away. It would be this magical experience. And we were around for a couple years. It raised $4 million. And then there were companies that were around for a couple months. They raised 10 million, then 20 million. I made a joke. I said they can't raise 30 million. And then they raised 30 million, and I made a joke they can't raise 50. And then 60 million was raised by one, and $77 million by another. So I'm thinking, oh man, whew, what do I do? I had these neat unit economics, which now the CACs are starting to get blown up as they're just spending with abandon. And the unit economic model that we had and all the assumptions that were set that seemed so great were now on the brink of seemingly disaster. I was also told by many that we were being disrupted before we had a chance to disrupt. And I was thinking, like, I know this industry, there's no way that this is going to work. There's some major issues with it, but I couldn't ignore it. I felt almost like, am I the same as the parking folks that told me no one would buy parking on a telephone? And had to have some, deep existential thoughts about where we were going and where we had come from. And so we ended up actually testing this in New York, spun up an on-demand valet company in New York and Chicago, and we found what we had thought, or what I had known, but now I could prove it to different constituents, which was there were structural issues with the business model. Yes, it was a magical experience, but the farther you parked, yes, it was cheaper to store the car, but now you increase the labor costs to retrieve it and to put it there, and you increase the variability in the traffic because it's hard to predict. So the more you scaled, the more expensive it got from costs, and the harder it was to have a good customer experience. And so we knew this, but it was still tough because these companies had raised so much more money than us. And so we tried to combat in different ways aside from capital formation. And one of those ways was BD. So Lux Valet raised $50 million from Hertz. There were different ecosystems forming at the time in mobility. They had just done a deal with Uber as well. And we did what we could. We leveraged our networks. And even though there was an announcement, because we had a heads up that $50 million was raised by Lux Valet, we were actually signing a commercial deal with Hertz, which was announced right after how SpotHero is powering parking in the app. And so we tried to combat different things without money at the time so that we then could get money. So here's an example of how it works within the app. And it was kind of interesting that even though they had led the round in seemingly our direct competitor, they were doing a commercial deal with us. Well, fast forward till today, and every single one of the on-demand valet companies has since shut down and ceased their operations. Media validation, same thing. Every single day there was an article about how great this on-demand valet was. My mom was asking me about it. Our investors were telling me how great it was. Board meetings were fun. And half of the growth funds in Silicon Valley had made a bet there as we were gearing up to raise our Series B. So we really thought through how do we talk with the media, and I started to meet with folks and explain why they were wrong. And they're like, Mark, you seem really defensive. I'm like, I'm not being defensive. What are you talking about? I'm not defensive. You're just wrong. Well, I honed in my pitch to the media over time, and eventually articles like this started to pop. All it took was one journalist to believe and to see, and this was the beginning of the change in the media. And I'll be honest, there was times when I'm like, this is such fake news. Just ignore it, Mark. It's fake news. But the reality is media validation is important because it creates momentum, and momentum creates momentum for good or bad or better or worse. So this is some of the stuff that's worked for us. Doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But we have had to experience a lot of seemingly tough choices along the way. Marketplaces are not easy, but once you break through to the other side, there's a lot of benefits that block out folks and create a momentum, which is pretty exciting. That's SpotHero, Park ADM. Thank you.